Welcome back to Easily Explained, where today we will be talking about sustainable development. So let's get started. In the last video, we talked about what resources are and why they're so important, especially certain types of resources that include the category of non-renewable resources. But we talked about how important they are, so what are we doing about that? What are we doing to conserve those natural resources? Because a lot of those resources are what we need to develop society and move further with technology and energy. So how do we balance both of those things? So when we talk about resources and conserving them in ecology, the phrase tragedy of the commons often comes up. And basically what the tragedy of the commons is the idea that if a resource is free and accessible to everyone, it will eventually be destroyed. Basically, nobody is fully responsible for protecting it and making sure that it is not all used up, and nobody is benefiting from preserving it because everybody is using it. Then nobody's going to protect it and it'll eventually be destroyed and used up. This idea came from the inhabitants of an English village. They could graze their cattle on shared pasture land, and those were called the commons because everybody could use them, and it was without any money. And so obviously, to benefit themselves, the villagers put more cattle than the land could support, and the land was overused. And even if villagers could see that eventually this land is going to be unusable, they couldn't stop using it because others were still benefiting from that. So if they were to not use those common lands, then they would disadvantage from that. So overgrazing on these villages led to pastures deteriorating, and they couldn't be used any longer for grazing. So that's where the tragedy of the commons idea comes from, because nobody is going to be responsible for protecting it, then we're going to suffer the consequences for those resources that we overuse. And that's where we start talking about sustainable development. Sustainable development is the term of basically using natural resources without depleting them. So we're providing for the needs of humans and technology and energy and society, but without causing environmental long-term harm. And for different types of resources, like renewable resources, like land, forests, air, fresh water, fisheries, there are different ways that we can use sustainable development that are completely targeted to the specific resource, because sustainable development is not just one idea. It has to have some sort of strategy, and there's different ways to use sustainable development for different resources. So for sustainable development to work, it has to take into account a couple different things. Number one, we have to obviously know how the ecosystem functions, so we know exactly what changes to the ecosystem will throw it off of balance, and we can figure out the food web that's occurring in that ecosystem so that we maintain that balance. And another key factor of sustainable development is to take into account how our economic system works, how it functions. Because, for example, if we say something like preserving fish and marine animals, because that's a job and people make their living off of that, so we also have to be mindful how we might throw our economic system off of balance if we completely lean to one side. And that's what sustainable development is all about. It's about creating a balance between humans and their needs and the environment and its needs. It also has to let people live comfortably, because as a society we've come so far and we can't undo some of that development. We have to continue on that development. But in the name, it's also sustainable. So that's where the first step comes in, because we need to find that balance. But we still need to make sure that people aren't going, that it's won't be like a reverse development. Like, it's actually still helping society and people's needs, because that is also important. So to use all of these different factors and convert them into what we would call sustainable development, a way of using those natural resources, we need research. Ecological research helps us understand how human activities and nature can be at balance. And these sustainable development strategies can be laws, they can be different acts, or they can just be different strategies and different ways we can combat environmental harm. For example, when we talk about air as a resource and the human negative impact on the environment would be pollutants and smog and carbon dioxide. But when we talk about a sustainable development method to fix this, is there's a Clean Air Act that limits the emissions in the air and pollutants, so it is able to balance the needs of humans and factories and technology and the environmental harm that it causes. Or when we talk about like fertilizers to control pests in farms and stuff that can harm our different resources. So the use of insects to control pests is one way that sustainable development works. Like ladybugs can eat aphids and different insect pests, and that helps farmers reduce their use of pesticides. Congratulations, you are now an expert at sustainable development. If this video helped, please like, subscribe, and share with your friends, and we'll see you guys next time. Bye!